We'd been talking about it for weeks. Camping. Well, my daughter had, I should say. Personally, I was kind of on the fence. I'm not really an outdoors kind of guy, to put it mildly. If you'd asked if I'd ever pitch a tent, I'd probably just slap my thigh and giggle uncontrollably. Moving into a new house is a strenuous task in and of itself, but add starting a new job and a new life into the mix, and you end up with one adult who doesn't know how to calm down, relax, or spend time with his daughter. So that's where the camping idea originated. I promised her we'd go once settled in, and she made damn sure to hold me to it, reminding me of it at least 5 times daily. Melissa was a hurricane, always up to something. Some would call her a handful, but that would be nothing short of a gross understatement. But she was also sweet, dedicated, focused, and extremely imaginative. That's why it was so easy to sometimes forget I was the adult. She would mostly just take care of and entertain herself, but camping definitely required at least one adult. That's what I read somewhere anyway, and I was planning to go through with it. I swear, but alas, I can't control the weather. It started Thursday afternoon, pouring rain and strong winds. She, were planning on heading out Saturday morning, but when we woke up, it had gotten even worse. Now, I'm no weatherman, but the weatherman on the local news is. Thus, I was inclined to believe him when he claimed we were dealing with a storm. Melissa was devastated, of course. She'd been really looking forward to it, picking out possible locations for our campsite, reading up on the flora and fauna of the area, learning what animals we might encounter. When I told her there was no way we could go camping in a storm, she broke down crying. I don't think she was mad at me, but it still broke my heart. So that's when I proposed that we could set up camp right there in our living room. At first, she found the idea stupid. How could that be any fun? No animals, no fishing, no searching for remedial herbs, no nothing. But she slowly came around to the idea. We could turn off all the lights, sleep in the tent, read scary stories, pig out on junk food. We could pretend we were lost campers in a storm and that something terrible lurked just outside our tent. So we pitched the tent, uninnuendoally, right there between the couch and the TV. Laid out the sleeping bags, emptied the cabinets and cupboards for all things sweet, killed the lights and crawled into our cozy little campsite universe. She brought her favorite book, Little Pumpkin and the Cold Bones, by Manon Lysette. While I was quite looking forward to reading this weird book I'd found hidden under a loose floorboard in the attic, The Electric Boner, by some guy named Nathaniel Lewis. The pages were oddly sticky, but what can you do? We snuggled up in our sleeping bags and had a great time, listening to the creepy creaking of the old house, the ghostly, banshee-like sounds of the wind, eating snacks and telling each other scary stories. Hers scared the hell out of me, let me tell you. She read to me from her book, and I read to her from my book. Not a good idea. And it was just wonderful. She fell asleep pretty late, face down in her book Popcorn, and I guess I followed soon after. I think it was the cold that woke me up. That's the first thing I remember anyway. Freezing cold, way below crippling cold. I was shivering and chopping my teeth uncontrollably. The sleeping bag was barely warm enough to keep me from going into hypothermia. What the heck was going on? It was dark. Way too dark. Sure, we'd switched off almost all of the lights, but I was sure I left at least a few of them on. Had the power gone out? Given the intensity of the storm, it was entirely possible, but it still didn't explain the cold. I sat up clumsily, still constrained by the rather tight-fitting sleeping bag. There was something off. Something I couldn't explain. "Melissa?" I whispered. No answer. "Melissa!" I said slightly louder. "Are you there? Wake up!" I got my arm free and blindly felt around the tent. Nothing. Not even her sleeping bag. Maybe she was uncomfortable, couldn't sleep and decided to go to her bed? Maybe she just had to use the toilet and took the sleeping bag with her for warmth. I guess both those made sense, but I still couldn't shake that strange feeling. The feeling that told me I wasn't in my house anymore. I fumbled to find the zipper, My fingers were completely numb from the cold, and I had to pause every once in a while to breathe some warmth back into them. When I finally found it, without thinking, I just yanked it open, not considering what I might face on the other side. Snow. No wonder it was so dark. The tent was completely covered in snow. I managed to crawl out awkwardly, a growing sense of dread slowly revealing itself as I realized just how far from the house I had to be. I stumbled to my feet, looking around at my newfound location, completely dumbfounded. It was amazing, unreal, and fucking terrifying. It was dark, but not too dark. Dusky or dim, I guess. But the full moon and the clear sky above illuminated just about everything. I was standing in what appeared to be a deep ravine, the steep, jagged rock walls stretching impossibly high into the air on either side. The ground was covered in about 2 feet of snow, and I could see the slope curving even deeper ahead. But what really caught my eye, the thing that instantly sent adrenaline pumping through my system, was the footprints in the snow. They were leading further down the slope. 2 distinct sets of footprints. One were boot prints, obviously adult, a male probably judging by the size. The other, the naked footprints of a child. Melissa, it had to be her. Without thinking, I immediately sprung to action and halfway ran, halfway stumbled through the snow, calling out her name in shrieks of utter panic. Melissa! Melissa! The only thing I could hear was my own echoing voice. I kept going, the cold not bothering me as much, probably because of the previously mentioned adrenaline. But I knew, deep down, I wouldn't last long in these temperatures. I followed the footprints for about 5 minutes when I spotted the blood. Just tiny droplets in the snow to begin with, but growing in both size and frequency the further I went. She was hurt. The sick fucker that was chasing her had hurt her. I felt a kind of mixture between horror and fear and rage that completely possessed me, and driven by this terrible emotion, I set aside all pain and exhaustion, running at speeds I've yet to match. And then I found them. It was sort of a circular chamber, the end of the slope. The moonlight hit them just right, and it felt like I was watching everything unfold in some crazy hallucination. She didn't wear any clothes. She was completely naked, and her pale skin appeared almost blue. She had her back turned to me, her flowing hair reaching down to her waist. "Melissa!" I yelled. The girl turned around slowly. She was bathed in blood, head to foot, and in her cold blue eyes I saw something disturbingly primal, something dark and animalistic. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. That wasn't Melissa. She sniffed the air like she was trying to ascertain if I was a threat or not, before bending down to the mangled corpse before her. What happened next, I still have problems describing. It was like watching a clan of hyenas rip their prey to pieces, except in this case, the hyenas were just a tiny fair-haired girl. I couldn't move. I didn't want to move. I think maybe I was afraid she'd react to any sudden movement, afraid she'd chase me down and kill me like she did that man. After about 10 minutes of watching her completely shred the corpse to tiny chunks, she took a long, deep breath of the freezing cold air and turned back to face me. "Have you seen Miss Piggy?" she asked. The bad man scared her. The voice was just so normal, exactly what you'd expect from a little girl, but it still struck fear in my heart, terrible, agonizing dread. No, I mumbled. "No, I haven't seen Miss Piggy." She stared at me for quite a while, her thin arms sort of waving hypnotically at her side. Every once in a while she broke out snarling like an agitated dog, almost as if she wasn't fond of her own thoughts. "You better go then," she eventually said. "Go back home." I stood there, shivering, suddenly realizing again just how cold it really was. The girl didn't seem to mind the sub-zero temperature at all. She just kept pacing around what was left of the corpse, occasionally erupting in wild, bestial snarls. "Go!" she said, suddenly shrieked. "Go before I change my mind!" I turned on a dime and ran back the way I came. I didn't stop, didn't even slow down to catch brief glances behind me. I just knew that I had to do what she said. If I didn't, she'd slaughter me without breaking a sweat. I arrived at the tent, wheezing, completely famished, exhausted, dehydrated, and dangerously hypothermic, all mixed into one bag of things that could kill me. What now? Was all I could think. What on earth should I do now? It was only when I heard the rapidly increasing sound of naked feet in the snow that I dove back into the tent, feverishly closing the zipper behind me. I don't know how long I stayed in there. Hours? Days? Probably not days. But at some point, I just lost consciousness, fainted. Everything turned black. I woke up in my living room. Well, in a tent erected in my living room at the very least. This is the part you'll loathe. The part some of you were expecting. The part where I tell you, it was all a dream. Well, that's what I tried to tell myself anyway. Just some freakishly vivid dream. So vivid, in fact, that I woke up with frostbite on my hands and feet. Melissa was sound asleep next to me, and I thanked all the gods I could remember the name of. At least she didn't get dragged into this terrifying nightmare. As I sat there, tending to my wounds, she slowly came to and sat up next to me. She gave me a long hug. "You all right, kiddo?" I asked. "Yeah, Daddy. I just wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" I said, slightly perplexed. "For the camping trip, of course. It was wonderful." I smiled. It had been pretty great. Well, except for that very vivid nightmare. But I was alive, and my daughter was happy. What more can a man ask for? "Guess what?" she said playfully. "What?" I smiled. "I got to ride her," she smiled gleefully. "What? Who?" I asked, truly puzzled. "Miss Piggy, of course. The girl thanked me for finding her, and she let me ride her." I'm never going camping in my living room again. I adopted my cat, Moxie, about a week ago. She's so adorable. I love seeing her play with her little toys, a ball of yarn, or tear the guts out of a mouse. Yes, she's cute even when she kills. What I find a bit weird is that she looks me straight in the eye as she rips the mouse to shreds. Does she want me to join in? Kitty cats are so silly. Moxie had a pretty traumatic past. Before she was at the shelter, she lived with a family of 5. Mom, Dad, 2 toddlers, and a baby. They all died on the same day. Mom, Dad, and the toddlers were found in their beds with their throats slit open. Cops couldn't even determine what kind of weapon was used. As for the baby, he was never found. They just found some of his tiny little fingers in Moxie's litter box. Poor Moxie. I can't imagine how sad she must have been. Losing her entire family and then just waiting around in a shelter for some kind soul to come along and take her home. Fortunately, that kind soul was moi. I wanted her the second I laid eyes on her. I'm pretty sure she wanted me too. Of course she did. Why else would her eyes emit a glow when I came closer to her cage? I wonder if the glow in the eyes thing is a breed-specific trait. I'm gonna have to Google that later. For all her cuteness, Moxie has habits that are a bit, weird. For example, the other night, I woke up to a strangling sensation. Moxie had somehow wrapped her yarn around my throat and was pulling on it with all her strength. And her strength is actually very impressive for a kitty cat. I somehow disentangled the yarn from my throat, and after coughing for a few seconds, I told Moxie that this was no time to play. She let out a disappointed sounding meow and left the room, taking her yarn with her. Maybe I need to spend more time with Moxie. What am I saying? Of course she needs more attention. She's probably still sad about losing her family. From now on, I'm gonna make more time for my little fur baby. This morning, as I ate my milk and cereal, Moxie sat right there on the breakfast table, watching me eat. She was so cute. Her eyes would follow the motion of the spoon carrying the milk and cereal into my mouth and then going back into the cereal bowl. I was just enjoying my breakfast and admiring Moxie's cuteness when my phone rang. I was so startled I dropped my spoon. Along with the milk and cereal spilt on the table was a small piece of glass. How'd that get in there? After finishing my phone conversation, I looked into my cereal bowl. There were several pieces of glass in there. They were all tiny. I probably wouldn't have been able to see them had I not dropped my spoon and spilt the milk and cereal along with that one piece of glass. How very irresponsible of the cereal company. I should sue them. Even Moxie seemed to agree with me as she let out a meow, just like she had done the previous night. Such a smart kitty. I just got home a short while ago. I bought a whole bunch of toys and interactive games for Moxie. I'm gonna be a better pet owner, and I will spend an hour every evening playing with my kitty. But first, I need a bath. I'm soaking myself in the tub. The warm water feels so relaxing. And Moxie is such a smart kitty. She just walked in, picked up my hairdryer in her mouth, and somehow plugged it in. This is amazing, and how very considerate of her. She doesn't want me to have wet hair and catch a cold, so she just came and sat at the edge of the tub holding the plugged-in dryer in her mouth. My parents have been nagging me for a while to get a job, so I figured I might as well start babysitting. I have a little brother that I am left home alone with all the time, so how hard could it be? I started to spread the word to my friends and family about my new babysitting service. The first call came from one of my aunt's neighbors, and she was extremely excited about my new service. She lives in a neighborhood full of rich people that all have huge houses. According to my aunt's neighbor, Ellen, it was her and her husband's anniversary on Saturday, and they wanted to go out to celebrate, but they needed someone to watch their 2 kids. I happily agreed to meet at their house at 6 on Saturday night. When Saturday night rolled around, my mom dropped me off at Ellen's house right around 6. I was a little bit nervous about my first official night as a babysitter, but I managed to calm myself down and rang the doorbell. Ellen answered the door and welcomed me kindly into her home. It was huge. There had to be at least 3 floors, and I was amazed. Ellen yelled to her kids to come down and meet their new babysitter for the night. 2 kids that were about 6 years old came running out from the other room and happily greeted me. They were twins. The boy's name was Tommy and the girl's name was Charlotte. Ellen's husband then came out of the other room putting on his jacket. Ellen then told me that they'll be back before 11. The couple headed to the door, and before they closed it, Ellen turned back and told me to make sure that the children are in bed before 8:30. I assured Ellen that the 2 kids would be tucked in by 8:30, and I locked the door behind Ellen. The 3 of us watched as the car backed out of the driveway and pulled down the street. We passed a lot of the time by playing games and watching TV. At one point, I looked at the clock and realized it was almost 8:30. I told the 2 kids that it was time to go get ready for bed and brush their teeth. The 2 reluctantly did what I had asked, and after they were done, I took the children up to their room. They both slept in the same bedroom, but their beds were against opposite walls in the room. The wall next to Charlotte's bed had nice flowers painted on it, and the wall next to Tommy's bed had some race cars painted on it. I gently tucked the 2 kids into their beds, shut the light off, and headed back down the stairs. I realized that I now had more than 2 hours all to myself. I assumed that I had managed to make it through the hardest part of the night and turned the TV back on. I watched a movie for about an hour, and when it ended, I started to randomly flip through some channels trying to find something new to watch. Eventually, I came across a channel that was just showing what seemed to be a dark room with a shadowy figure standing in it. The strange channel also had some random numbers in a white font at the top left of the screen. I became curious about this image that was on the screen, so I began to study it some more. I figured it was just an error happening with the broadcast. While studying the image on the screen in front of me, I noticed that on the far wall there was something drawn on it. As I kept looking, I was able to see that there were flowers painted on the wall. I quickly glanced back over to the shadow in the middle of the room, barely able to make out legs, arms, and a head. Whoever it was wearing very dark clothes and some kind of hat. Then the figure moved slightly to the right, and I choked back a scream. I saw Charlotte's sleeping head laying on the pillow next to the flowered wall. I suddenly realized that it wasn't just a random TV channel. I was watching the live feed from the security cameras in the children's room. I screamed and then heard loud footsteps coming from upstairs as the figure quickly darts off the screen. I sprinted to the front door, opened it, and ran for my life. In my moment of panic, I wasn't even thinking of the children. I ran and just kept running. I eventually made it far enough away that I felt somewhat safe and called the police. A few minutes later, a police car picked me up and drove me back to the house that I had just narrowly escaped. The place was surrounded by police cars. The officer driving the car told me that the man had escaped with both the kids by the time the police had shown up. It's exactly a year later now, and I've decided it's time I tell my story to the public. The police still haven't found either Charlotte or Tommy. Ellen and her husband moved out of their house because they couldn't stand living in a place where such a horrific crime took place. I haven't had a solid night's sleep since it happened. I just hope that Tommy and Charlotte are still alive somewhere out there. I'm a cat named Chester, and every human that loves or cares for me will die. From smiling at my cuteness when I was a kitten, to pitying me when they saw my scarred body as an adult, they always died. A name would suddenly appear on my caller's tag. Soon after, a human would die, and it always happened where I could see it. Some carried a face of shock and terror. The worst ones were those who died slowly, tears staining their faces as they felt a merciless death approaching them. Hate was the only way to protect them. I would hiss at, scratch, and viciously bite any human that tried to pet or pity me. Some would flee in tears. Others would retaliate with a well-placed kick, leaving me limping for weeks. I could never get any thanks for saving their lives, and I lacked the ability to end my own. Even on the days when my false sense of hate became real, where I hated every human, life itself, and even my own existence, my intent to end it all literally couldn't move my body. My body had trapped me in a loveless reality, with feelings I could never act on. One day, I was battling another cat for scraps of food. He scurried into the streets, and I gave chase. But he was quick, and by the time he crossed the street, I was still stumbling in the middle of it. Within the next moment, an unrivaled amount of pressure collided against my entire body, and I was left motionless on the street. My vision and hearing was fading. I had seen death so many times, but only then was I finally going to experience it. But I wasn't relieved, not yet. In those moments, I only felt frustration for not being quicker or smarter and dying a humiliating death because of it. But then I felt my body rise, and I was looking into the eyes of a human. He looked so scared and full of grief. I thought he was pitying me, and my trained instincts said to attack him in some way, but my body had failed me. He placed his hand on my cheek. I could barely hear a single sentence of his. Words like, "Sorry," "Help," "You'll be okay." Then he tried reading my tag and he said, "Chester, is that your name, little guy?" Maybe I hallucinated it, but I felt tears, my own tears. That human gently held me, and I knew it was okay to feel loved because he wouldn't die. But maybe I hallucinated that too. Maybe I wanted to hear my name when he really said his own. It might have all been some cruel nightmare before I regain consciousness and find that human dying in front of me. But please, whoever or whatever has given me this life, even if I endure it 1,000 more times, please just let this moment be real.